Okay, great. So today, I'll go back there a minute. What I want to talk to you about is exactly what Patrick was saying, direct observation, and what I have found to be its sort of vital role in not only ethnography in general, but specifically in user-centered design, and take you on a little bit of a journey, my journey in kind of reaching these conclusions through work that I was doing for, as Patrick said, almost 20 years at Lincoln Park Zoo, in developing this method and developing a new way of teaching this method now at Indy Zoo with the orangutans. But for the most part today, I'm going to be talking about my gorillas. So my background is actually not only my PhD in sociology, but in cognitive sociology. So it's about how membership in social groups affects the ways that we think. I spend a lot of time thinking about classification, categories, and trying to link these kinds of invisible, right, cognitive behaviors to the more visible everyday behaviors that we engage in. And so a couple of years ago, at the same time that Patrick came to IU, I took a new job here as well, and immediately came on board with a couple of different research groups here, the Computing, Culture, and Society, and the Security and Privacy groups, as well as the HCID, the Information and Computing Ethics group, and now with Patrick, our brand spanking new animal informatics groups, both the undergraduate and the graduate programs. And I know it looks like this is all over the place, but if I just tell you what my current book project is, it might make some sense. I'm actually going on sabbatical very shortly to work on this book on camouflage, looking across species and across the face-to-face and digital worlds in order to try and understand the kind of grammar of camouflage, the fundamental principles of it. So I'm a social scientist, but a scientist first and foremost, as well as a theorist, believe it or not. But I love fieldwork, and I love using all of those things in very applied ways to help define problems and opportunity spaces, and also to help solve them, or at least provide some insights that might lead to solutions. And I sort of feel like I need to begin with the qualifier that my favorite kind of ethnography is not really the norm, and it's certainly not the norm in the social sciences. If any of you have any experience with ethnography, you may very well associate it with anthropology, sociology, and sort of multi-year, long, immersive studies of communities, where people really talk about ethnography as more of an art form. It's kind of something that is a much more interpretive, more humanistic approach to thinking about this set of methods. And I'm at the other end of that spectrum, and it feels a little lonely over here sometimes, but I'm doing my best to try and change that up. I think of ethnography as a much more scientific, which means it's about systematic observation. That's what science is, pure and simple, systematic observation. Whatever your unit of analysis, whatever your methods, whatever the thing is that you're studying, it needs to be rigorous, and it needs to be peer reviewable. Much of ethnography, certainly most that I have read or looked at, is kind of not peer reviewable. The data is simply not made available to you. So this is my standard. I think of it as being a very analytical enterprise. I like my ethnography to be what I call mission driven, that there's a very specific question that I am trying to answer every day when I go to the field. And that when I start adding all of those things up, I will be driving myself toward an actual set of realizations and a deliverable based on that. My brand of ethnography is concept-based, not a surprise for a cognitive sociologist. I tend to embrace a very specific concept, and I use that to drive the questions that I'm asking myself and what I'm looking for in the field every day. That'll become clearer what I mean by that as I go along. And also deeply empirical. One of the things my students learn is that I'm a big fan of separating what you have seen from what you think about it and what it might mean. So by deeply empirical, I really mean I'm a social constructivist, but I actually believe there's a reality out there, and it's up to us to be very careful in separating what it is that we have observed from what it is that we think about what we have just observed, as much as possible, at least to be aware of that. I also really like creativity in this process. I think that science moves forward when we are approaching our task with as much of our creative hats on as we possibly can at all levels of the process. And I have to say I'm have a very ambitious approach to my ethnography. I like to think about big problems. I like to think about tiny little problems. I expect to have something to show for it at the end. And I want ethnographic methods to be used in as many different venues as we possibly can, along with all the other methods that we have in order to study and help design interventions. Post my PhD, I actually took a job at the Illinois Institute of Technology. It was a tenure track position in the Department of Social Sciences. And mostly I was teaching undergraduates, but we have two world-class programs at IIT, the Institute of Design, which some of the folks at this conference may have heard of, as well as the architecture school at IIT. And I very quickly started working with both the master's and the PhD students in these programs, primarily through the methods courses that I developed for them. And from that, nearly everything just started exploding for me. I started working with a number of design schools. I would say Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design is the one that I have sustained my relationship with the longest in a lot of ways. By the way, if you don't know, they have just started a new master's program from CIID in Costa Rica. And the focus of that program is design for life. And the students are focused very much on the ecosystem, on animals, on plants, on trying to figure out how do interaction designers turn towards this space. The overlap with our ACI community is substantial. And I'm mentioning this because CIID has an open call for people who would like to go teach there. And if going to Costa Rica and teaching for a couple of weeks to some of the smartest students that you will ever meet, if that appeals to you, take a look at their website and see if that might be something that would work in for you. From there, I just started working with a lot of consulting opportunities, both with these kind of big Fortune 50 companies, but also possibly even more lovely for me with startups and with nonprofits and with a number of business consultancies where a number of my prior students went to work and had colleagues, and that resulted in opportunities. I put Intel up here. Intel has underwritten, I have had 2 grants from Intel for more of my basic research, but Intel treats that like user-centered research, like research design for them. So I'll throw that up here too, because it's all related to this bigger picture of what I want to talk about today. And that is my experience anyway with successful user-centered design. It frequently relies on ethnographic research, which ethnography, if you don't have much experience with it, really is like a three-legged stool, and we rely on conversation, observation, and participation in order to better understand the space that we are working in, the potential problems and potential solutions. So conversation, observation, and participation, which is sometimes called participant observation. And we use ethnographic research throughout the design process. During idea generation, you might be studying a particular population or space just to get an idea of what are their problems, where are the opportunities for you to help. Once you have an idea, refining that idea, getting more information for the prototype development that you are interested in. And then, of course, afterwards in post-prototype deployment and through that iterative process of figuring out, is this succeeding? What could I change? How is it impacting the individuals that I have put this intervention in the middle of? But there's just one problem for me, which is that certainly in my experience and that of a number of my colleagues with whom I've talked to about this, ethnographic methods have been underdeveloped and undertaught. In graduate school, certainly my experience, and again, other people I've spoken with, what we did was we read and discussed ethnographies, right? These are books which are based on these methods. That was pretty much our training. We read books to learn how to do this. If we were lucky, those books might have an appendix where the authors talked about, usually it's problems of things like gaining access to the study population, or the problem of going native, or, should I record or not record my conversations with people? Fieldwork definitely was presented as that hanging out sort of thing, a methodology that anyone could do, and you could do it with no training. And so it became kind of a favorite thing, I think, for professors to assign projects and just say, oh, just go do ethnography because anybody can do that. And I don't have to give you any skills to do it. Certainly on that three-legged stool of conversation, observation, and participation, direct systematic observation was completely ignored. Nobody was talking about this at all. And so we were really missing the boat on something that I think could have a substantial impact on the quality of the work that we were doing. And in my program, not a design program, but in my program, we certainly never discussed the selective use of fieldwork, right? How it could be deployed strategically and applied to practical problems. Instead, it was kind of like, you're either all in for this big project, this big problem, or why would you even be talking about ethnography? And so by the time I was done, I went to IIT, I met these designers, I met these architects. I was pretty much convinced that we needed to have some kind of innovation in these methods. And definitely we needed innovation in how we teach this kind of research. So I landed on this idea of developing a course that I called Exercises in Direct Observation. And it was all about learning to envision, to gather, and to represent observation-based data, and then how to design from that data for the population you were studying while you were getting it. And these are some of my favorite individuals in the world who you're looking at right now. This guy up here, keep your eye on this little dorky 4-year-old male gorilla, because he will reappear later on. And if you don't know gorillas, you won't believe the transformation. Anyway, that's Amari. So why the zoo? Well, just like Maggie O'Hare was saying yesterday, I'm completely fascinated by non-human animals, always have been. I was raised in a family. We used to go on bird walks. My Dad was like the local rehab guy who every hurt bird was brought to us for help. And we used to go on hikes, and animals were just all about us. I can't even remember how many pets we had. So I'm fascinated by them, and I would definitely rather go to a zoo than to a sports event, as Maggie pointed out yesterday. I am always eager to get out of the classroom and to get into the field. And I really love to teach hands-on and side by side. There's really nothing like watching something happening with your students and being able to do the play-by-play. And what do we each see? What are we each getting out of that? Did you see this? Did you miss that? Did you, yep. Zoo populations are used to being watched, and they don't mind it if you're polite. You might have to find out what polite means for the different populations, the different species that you're watching, but it will get you in a lot less trouble than if you go to a coffee shop and you whip out your notebook and you start taking notes. Somewhere in the middle of this book, probably just toward the beginning of the idea for this book, I had started doing the exercises I'm going to tell you about every time I was taking a plane somewhere. So I'd sit in the airport and I would be sketching traffic patterns, and I would be noticing the way that people were handling their stuff and where they were putting it, how they were managing that, what they were doing with all the things around them. And then 9/11 happened. And you could get in big trouble for taking notes like that in an airport once 9/11 happened. At the zoo, you never get in trouble for doing that sort of thing. So it's kind of a great place to do it. Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, where I was, is a free zoo. It is open 365 days out of the year. It's climate controlled. It's a beautiful space where the gorillas are. And it has really welcoming and smart professional staff. The keepers, later the researchers who were working there and got to know us, these people were really wonderful. I have a couple of pictures for you so you can see. This is the outside of one of the gorilla exhibits at Lincoln Park Zoo. Here is the inside of that same exhibit. You can see it's been designed to have this glass, triple pane glass, safety glass, so that people can get right up next to each other. And here we are with the doors that open to the outside. This is what one of the outside habitats looks like from above. We actually got up in a Ferris wheel to take this picture. And here's what my class would look like. We would sit on the floor, and this little guy right in the middle here was a zoo visitor. Here's his mom. And he knew a circle up time for a class when he saw it, and he just joined us that one day. So I had to have a picture of this little guy joining us. All right, so that's why the zoo, why exercises. So the studio model of doing classes gives you a challenge. It gives you, here are some constraints. Now I want you to respond to this challenge in whatever way makes sense for you. And I think that that is just a great model for embracing a student's creativity. And if what we want to do is innovate in methods, and we want to innovate in our discipline, we have to find ways that we can bring the uniqueness of a student, their biography, their skill set, their imagination. We need to bring that together with the discipline, right? The core of the discipline, and how, so we discipline the student and we transform the student, but the student is impacting on the discipline and helping to transform it at the same time. Exercises, I think, are a especially good way to teach ethnographic methods because in the student responses, no two responses are going to be alike in this approach, but they should be complementary. So it, again, it embraces the variation that you're going to see, but also says we're all held to the same reality. And if we're not seeing the same reality, let's figure out what's going on there. I think exercises are how we get better at any skill. You know, if you were like me when you were little, you got dragged off to piano lessons and you had your exercises, your Hannon and your Czerny and your scales. It doesn't matter what the skill set is, exercises, and especially when we repeat exercises, that's how we get better. And I also think that an exercise can provide the mission for the day. It can, and then you can systematically focus on all the components that are going into the response to that exercise. The concept underlying it, the mechanics of doing it, taking the data, capturing this stuff, then transforming it when you write it up and try to represent what you found. All the decision moments that we make in our field notes and in constructing these analytical representations of the data afterwards. Field notes are such a fascinating thing. I could talk forever about them. A number of the students who I've taught over the years, English is sometimes it's their third or fourth language. And when we look in their field notes, it's absolutely fascinating to see which things they capture with a drawing, which things they capture with words, and what language they select for capturing different parts of the field. So we spend a lot of time talking about that sort of stuff. Why gorillas? Well, you can see how analytical I am, and I couldn't stop until I got to 10. This is a very hard method. It's hard to learn how to observe by watching people. By the time we get to college and graduate school, we don't see most of what people do. And we do get into big trouble for paying too close attention to the stuff we're not supposed to be paying close attention to. It's much easier to learn all of this by watching a different species. I think it's easier to force yourself to design from data and the analysis of that data when you don't have any assumptions about the users. It really strips it down to what did I see? What is actually substantiated by what I saw? Big one, students cannot substitute talking with the users, talking with the study population for watching the study population. It is a huge temptation. It's really hard to learn how to do direct observation. And if you want, you could just walk over and talk to a person and try to get the information. Can't do that with any other species. So these first three are sort of like, why another species? Well, now why gorillas? Because I need a single species, small social groups. They need to be consistently visible. I started this course. We used to go to the Shed Aquarium for part of the course, and we would start doing it with slow moving reptiles and fish. And we would work our way up to the ocean mammals at the Shed Aquarium in Chicago. Then we would switch over to the zoo and we would watch gorillas or chimpanzees, dealer's choice. Pretty soon I realized that the students needed to have a single species for the entire duration if they were going to go from data to design. And it needed to be a species that they could get a grip on. Gorillas move slowly enough, and in the troop, they're different enough from each other so that students can start to see what they initially can't see pretty quickly. Gorillas are also other enough for the lessons learned from them to be useful for humans. It turns out that these students would inevitably focus on this piece of their portfolio in their job interviews. And I've lost track of how many emails I got telling me, I just got a job at Apple, I just got a job at Google, and they just loved my gorilla work. And I think that's why I got it. As it turns out, I'm also fascinated by gorillas. I don't think I was when I started doing this, but I spent a little bit of time and pretty quickly you are. The students are too. And the lessons from teaching with a species like this stick with students throughout their careers. I'm still getting notes from people who took this course 20 years ago who say, I was with a client the other day and it just reminded me of when Azizi, the gorilla, did X. Okay, so the exercises. There were 9 that I put together. This is just to get the ball rolling. The whole idea here is that anybody can invent any exercise they want for themselves, depending on what it is that they're trying to get better at. It's that idea of, pick and choose, rinse, repeat as often as you want. The first exercise was just an open observation. Everything takes 1 hour in the field, and you spend the rest of the week writing it up, turn it in the next week, do the next exercise. So open observation. And kind of the lesson here is really sort of, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have a mission, if you aren't focused on what you are trying to learn, if you don't have a starting point, good luck. It's kind of a crapshoot if you wind up getting anything out of that session. So in exercise 2, I start them focusing on temporality, on time, and how to think about time and how to incorporate time in observation exercises or field notes. So this one is very simple. It's like a time stamp. Now we do an observation for an hour. Note what you see and note the time that it's happening. This right away ups the ante in people's note taking. What time did this happen? The third exercise in temporal mapping 2 is now we add these other structural dimensions of time. In addition to thinking about artificial time versus natural time, we start thinking about duration. How long did this thing last? Thinking about sequence, cyclicality, repetition, looking for patterns in activity that you might notice as it's happening over time. Exercise 4, we add space into the mix. And here, I ask them to note what time things happen, how long they last, look for patterns in the activities, but also focus in this case on the negative space in between individuals. There's a lot that we learn in sociology from proximity to another individual. There's a lot that's learned in animal behavior in general from proximity and regulatory patterns of cushions between individuals. So in this exercise, it's pay attention to all that other stuff. And now let's see if you can capture how far apart are these individuals. Just 2, if that's all you want to handle. If that's the relationship that you're interested in, try to go for a few more and see if you can capture those. And we're doing this now at what's called interval research, where we pick a time and we say, okay, every 3 minutes, I'm going to take data and I'm going to watch for 10 seconds, and then I'm going to write for 2 seconds, and then I'll take another data point, and I'll so on and so forth. Learning how to adjust that in order to gather this data over time in a systematic way. The 5th exercise is all about, let's go back to unstructured observation so that we can see how these can complement each other. These more structured moments in the field, these unstructured moments where you just sit back and you just watch and you let it wash over you. What do you learn like that? What do you learn when you go in with a specific mission? Returning in exercise 6 to spatial temporal mapping 2, and I have some examples of this that I'm going to show you. In this case, we're no longer focused on the negative space between individuals. We're taking snapshots of where everybody is, whatever your interval is, every 3 minutes, every 5 minutes, whatever you can handle. Where is everybody in the space at every moment of your data taking process? So snapshots, building it up over time. Exercise 7, now I'm starting to show, okay, we've talked about the concept of time, we've talked about the concept of space. Let's talk about something that's a little more elusive, like power and status. And all of these, there are readings, right? Theory and analysis of these concepts scattered throughout here. Thinking about how power plays and status shows dominance, submission, right? Displacement behavior, whatever it is in the species that you're watching, what might that look like? And let's think about why you think that's about power. Exercise 8, which I call object mapping 1, think of this as a day in the life of an object. Could be any object at all. And it is, let's just focus on that as our focal point and see what happens as we go around. We're going to describe its formal attributes, the materials it's made of, who's touching it, how often are they touching it, does it never get touched, where is it located, does it travel over time, just focus on an object. And then finally in exercise 9, I have them focus on what I think is the single most difficult concept, which is play. And the reason I think that's the most difficult is because it's about a frame. It's about how you're thinking about the activity. And in another species, how do you recognize play when it's happening in another species? It can be hard enough to recognize it in our own species. How do we do that in another one? So we kind of end that up with the most difficult one of all. Okay, I promised one of the exercises specifically. I'm actually going to read this whole thing, so relax. Focus on the same environment as last time. Create a spatiotemporal map of how the environment is used by all its inhabitants. Create quadrants or use some other, perhaps topographical technique to break down the entire space into roughly comparable units. Observe and track movement through the space to see how it's used. Note the timing, sequences, and durations of occupancy. It may be very helpful to note the activities in which individuals are engaged at each data observation mark. Your goal is to watch how the space itself constrains the possibilities of how individuals use and move through it. Your first priority, where is everyone at your observation mark, right? Snapshot. Your second priority, for how long do they stay there? And your third priority, what are they doing while they're there? If you can get all of this, you may be able to discern paths of movement or zones of transit versus places that are occupied for substantial durations of time, as well as clues of why individuals are where they are, given the activity they seem to be engaged in. So think like a choreographer. Break the space into front, middle, and back depth areas, as well as bottom, middle, top, vertical, and left, center, right, horizontal zones. You may find yourself adapting the number of areas as you try to track all of the activity and find it easier to pinpoint locations across a different number of units. So here is what that exercise looks like in just a couple of students who then took all of that data, turned it into a model that would represent their data. And the challenge that I give them is to present data in a way that it almost analyzes itself for the person who's looking at that representation. So in this case, Mark did a cluster mapping. This is this triangular brick that you see here is a gorilla habitat. And each one of these different colored balls represents a different gorilla. And so in his snapshots across time, this is where each one of those gorillas were. And now he's just looking then at the density of frequency of occupation at different moments in this habitat for different individuals. For instance, if we look down here, right, we see this big cluster of red balls, and there are a couple of over here and over here. This is the silverback swan, and this is his favorite place to be sitting to keep an eye on everything going on with his troop back here, which is a bunch of adult females and their babies. And also, my guess is when he ran over here, there was something going on above him that he didn't like. And when he ran over here, there was something going on over here that he didn't like. And then he probably returned to his main monitoring location. So very simple to see who is where in the habitat across this time. Here's another way. Now we're looking at a habitat straight on, and we're looking at heights and how is occupancy distributed vertically by all of these individuals. And in this case, here's Kwan is now a brown square. And so this is Kwan, and he runs up here. The blue one is a Mari, and we can see what he's doing across time. That's his son. And then up here, we've got purple and yellow, and this is a mother-daughter pair. And they pretty much just get up and stay out of the way so that dad and his number one female, Kawali, and their son occupy the more premium places in this habitat over time. Here we have from Eugene, both a bird's eye view on the top. This is looking down at the habitat, so you get that depth information. And on the bottom of this diagram, this page, we get the straight on view so that we can see the vertical distribution. And with these arrows, we can see movements throughout. If you follow one colored line, you can see where an individual went across time, both from the top, if I'm looking down to see where they were in the habitat, and from the bottom. And here is Sally's. Sally's rendition of this I really like because it reminds me of the three-dimensional chessboards in Star Trek that I used to watch when I was a kid. And it really does get at sort of the essence of what it means to be a gorilla in a habitat like this. It's a three-dimensional chess game. And when one individual moves, you see the others moving because they're displacing each other and they're constantly having to keep track of where everyone is and do they need to move in order to accommodate another individual's preferences. One of the things that we talk about in gathering this kind of data is the importance of templates and of developing templates in the field or when you go home and you know you're going to be doing repeated exercises, develop it at home, bring it back. This still wins for me, the hands down template design. Japanese designer Chiho Sasaki, who was tracking 3 chimpanzees. And you can see on the top, she's got, there's a bar that runs across the top of this page. And she was interested to see if whether the shadow, the darker parts of the habitat or the brighter parts of the habitat, were there any patterns in where individuals tended to want to be. She was also tracking vertical movement throughout the habitat and used different highlighters in order to track different individuals. This little piece here in the template captures the bird's eye view. It's from the front to the back of the habitat. What were they doing? What was this individual doing? And then for good measure, she added a quick activity list here. Think of it as an ethogram graph paper approach for this. So using templates can make a big difference. And you can imagine, look at the time stamp that she's got up here. It's from 1:40 to 2:10. That's a half an hour of data taking. And believe me, you are exhausted at the end of that half hour when you're looking this closely. But the lessons that you get from doing that are just enormous. So the final project for this course, right, was designing from observation-based data only. And I would say that whatever species the user belongs to, observation data can really give you some good clues for innovative, useful design ideas, particularly when it comes to assessing their success and also the intended and unintended consequences on the stakeholders once you've deployed. So here are some I wanted to find a couple of examples for you of final projects that were based on that spatiotemporal 2 data that I just showed you, those diagrams. And so here are a couple of them. Let's see if I can get this. Okay, so this is you'll recognize what you saw. You overlay all of that data that Jim took on who was where in the habitat. And this is what he found. Now you're very restricted in a zoo. Like this is your space. This is what you have to live in. And if you find out that your population is actually not using a third of the habitat that you've provided for them, that is a real opportunity to figure out what could I do to incentivize or to do something to encourage them to use that, or to address the issues that might be making them avoid the use of that space. So lo and behold, this is why the gorillas were avoiding all of that space along that glass wall that you can see, staying away from it as much as they could. And now Jim was also interested in, okay, let's look vertically. Is there anything here about any sort of spaces that are vertically not being used? Okay, what's going over here? Is that an opportunity? Why is there nobody in this space right here? So he's focusing on that over a couple of weeks. He says, what have I got? Where can I look? Why should I move anyway? Now he asks himself, if I want them to use those spaces, what kinds of incentives might actually work? Well, you know, you move for food, you move because you're interested, you move because you love the keeper and you want to go see the keeper and visit with him. So some solutions that Jim came up with: let's put some temporary vines across that glass. Let's add some modular spaces, maybe even an atrium in that space that they're not using. And let's see if we can put some food units that will require them to go into that empty space and now cooperatively work together, using the space for something that they value. You know, thinking about limitations in the data, implementation, how you would do that, sort of classic design things, right? So I think I'm probably kind of running out of time, so I'm gonna not show you too many more of those. I will say that, as Patrick mentioned, one of the things that I did was I decided to take all of this work and put it together in a book, so that people who couldn't take a class together, people who wanted to get better at this approach and this method, would have an opportunity. Not only is there a book, there's a companion website that has like 10 sample responses to each one of these exercises, so that even if you're working independently without anybody else, you'll have an opportunity, hopefully, to get better at this. So I am a strong believer that direct observation is essential whenever you cannot rely solely on conversation or participation, or you shouldn't be relying solely on conversation or participation to understand the user's perspective. For me, it is therefore a vital skill set for animal-centered design, direct observation. I don't know how we do it without that. I also think that better observational skills and better ways of teaching them can help us design better services, experiences, objects, and spaces for the animals, but also for humans that might help modify undesirable human behavior, which is directed toward animals. So however you want to do it, more indirectly to benefit the animals or directly, I think direct observation can help. And one of the things that I wanted to do in 2009, there was a handful of students who were so taken with this. It seemed to me like a good time that we could actually write a book. And this is a book written for 6th grade readers and up. I had to learn how to write at the 6th grade level to write this book, which is very fun. And we decided that most people don't learn about user-centered design or about the importance of social structure for individuals and for supporting individuals in their quality of life. They don't learn about that until college, and it's too late. So we thought we're going to use these gorillas as a hook to teach about user-centered design, about social structure, and to increase genuine appreciation for this species themselves. Because you go to the zoo, people spend 30 seconds in front and they move on and they don't really know what they're looking, and nobody's helping them to understand what they're looking at. So we wanted to do this. And this was our gift to the gorillas, in fact, to try and make their life a little bit better, and in appreciation for each one of them. This book has done really well. It's a little unique. It's something I'm very, very proud, by the way, of the 2017 Children's Choice Award from the International Literacy Association. 12,500 elementary school students in the United States voted to give us that award. So that makes me very happy. And it begins by looking at the social structure of a troop, the social structure that guides these great apes and everything in their day. Because whatever you design for them, whatever you do for them, should come out of what is their reason for being, which is all about their social unit. So it begins with that, and then we move into design considerations, whether it is designing a day, designing the year, designing their menu, designing their training or their habitats that they live in, or even designing the troop itself according to the species survival plan that zoos have to follow. People weren't the only ones who loved our book. This is actually that little dorky guy I pointed out to you at the beginning, Amari. He's our cover boy for this book. And here he is, a grown silverback. The book had just come out and I went there with two friends of mine, and Amari never paid much attention to me, but he came walking over so quickly when he saw me with this book. And I thought, oh my goodness, does he, number one, recognize himself on the cover? And number two, does he want to see something? So he sat down just as you see him. And I thought, okay, I have a feeling I know what you're going to want to see. So I found a page and he sat there. It was well over 10 minutes, probably closer to 15, just watching and watching. And I'll show you what he was looking at. This is the page. It's a page of baby pictures. And he was in particular looking at this one, which is his mother nursing him when he was about 2 months old. And at the time that we were having this session together, Amari hadn't seen his mom in about 5 years. She had been transferred to Knoxville Zoo, and he just wanted to stare and stare at this picture. We also, I never think you can start, too early to build a pipeline for an animal informatics student in the future. So we also made a baby book, a board book. What is baby gorilla doing? And these also, they don't usually get reviewed, but this got reviewed really well. It's just way too fun. Again, it's about observing closely. It's about finding similarities. And this is how we did it, with a very simple, can you tell what this gorilla is doing? And actually, there are 3 little girl gorillas who are throughout this book. Some kids get good enough that they can tell this is not the same gorilla. Little tip, gorillas all have a different nose. So if nothing else helps, you can compare their noses and see if it's the same gorilla that you think you're looking at. Never a wasted moment, even in the board book. Some of the research has shown that just seeing an endangered species baby with a human makes people think that things aren't so bad. So the zoo has a policy of saying we do not photograph our babies with humans in the picture. We only want them with conspecifics or alone. And you may have also seen there are some collections out there. All the photos that I've shown you, all of these photos are taken through glass using nothing but natural lighting. And there are people who will take beautiful studio photos of other great apes. They do a magnificent job at capturing their character and everything, but that's not what we're doing. We don't think you should have to bring an animal out of its family and out of its regular habitat and do that. So our challenge is, like a good ethnographer, to get it in situ in the field. And then we use Photoshop techniques to remove the field so that we can focus your attention on the piece of what's happening there that we want from you. So we put this on the back of the book, hoping that maybe parents might even be able to see the baby gorillas in this book were photographed alongside their families in their regular zoo habitat, doing what they normally do. And so now I'm teaching this at Indy Zoo, up there in the Simon Scott Center, and learning to love orangutans in addition to gorillas. The pandemic has put a little bit of hold on that burgeoning love affair, but I hope that we're going to be able to get up there next year every spring when I teach this course. And that's it. Thank you very much.